What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button, and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
At the end of the 60s, the automobile market in Europe was on the rise. The hardships and deprivations of the post-war years were. In the past, and in the model range of the German company BMW, there were no funny and amusing Isetta sidecars for a long time. On the contrary, between manufacturers from Munich and Stuttgart there was a clear confrontation in the struggle for Deutschmarks. In the purse of not the poorest buyer. Opel did not enter this battle, acting in the unspoken table of ranks lower than Mercedes and BMW. Volkswagen, in fact, mass-produced. Only the Beetle, well, the brand Audi in its current sense, was just emerging as a legacy of a large sedan NSU Row 80 BMW's model lineup. At that time included both compact sedans of the 2002 model and larger cars under the 2500 index, the successors of the 2000 model. These were cars, although belonging to the Neue Klasse, new class, but developed in the mid-60s with the appropriate level of ergonomics and equipment. And as the competition in this segment was getting tougher and tougher, Munich realized that they needed new blood, and it was not only about the car, but also about those who created it. After all, Mercedes at that time actively worked on a promising large sedan. It later became the first S-Class with the index W116, released in 1972. BMW thought about a more compact sedan, which by conventional standards belonged to the segment E or the class of the Soviet Volga. That is, the successor of the new class. The car was to receive a new appearance, while retaining the family features of sedans of the 2000 series. In this it was helped by Paul Bracq, a French automobile designer, who previously worked for Mercedes-Benz. It is Bracq who has something to do with the design of the famous Pagoda W113, as well as a number of other Mercedes of the 60s. At the time when BMW was just thinking about a new secret weapon, Bracq stopped working for Mercedes. Not surprisingly, a couple of years later, in 1970, the Frenchman headed the BMW Design Bureau, where he was actively engaged in the development of a large sedan, the future E12. In 1973, the BMW Turbo prototype created by Paul became the conceptual car of the year, according to Automobile Review. However, the first BMW model, to which Bracq successfully applied his hand, was the 5. It became the first for the company in many ways. For example, it was with the 5th series that the actual to this day 3-digit designation began, where the first digit indicates the family and the second and third, it is the working volume of the engine. For a long time, the last pair of digits, for example, 25, could immediately understand that under the hood there is an engine of the corresponding liter, 2.5 liters. However, it was with the 5, but the second generation E28, that the departure from tradition began, when the 2.7-liter engine corresponded to the index 525E. The 5th series was intended to occupy an intermediate position between the compact sedans of 2002 and the large 6-cylinder cars. E3 and E9 under the conventional name New 6, becoming the progenitor not only of a new class, but also of a new model range of BMW. The design of the E12 is notable for its large glazing area with a low belt line, which provided the car with a light and airy silhouette. A minimum of minor elements had a positive effect on the purity of lines, and the trademark shark nose, or rather, its rudiments, became the basis for the formation of a new corporate style of the exterior, which for several decades defined the appearance not only of the 5, but also of the entire range of BMW cars. A distinctive feature of the 5th series was a power steering and rear shock absorbers, placed inside the springs, so that on some versions the rear suspension was equipped with a system of automatic maintenance of ground clearance regardless of loading. Another interesting feature of the 12th is a diagnostic socket under the hood and a set of tools in a special compartment fixed on the inner surface of the trunk lid, which became a family trait of the brand for a long time. An important difference of the 520i model, as it is easy to guess by the letter I, is the Kugelfischer distributed fuel injection system with a high-pressure fuel pump. And also in the engine lineup of this class for the first time appeared 6-cylinder engines, taken from older models, which deserves A more detailed consideration. Initially, the novelty, which appeared in September 1972, was presented with a four-cylinder M10 engine with a capacity of 2.0 litres. And if the 520i version had a traditional carburetor power system, the more expensive 520i version was equipped with an outlandish fuel injection system for those times. A year later, in 1973, a new motor, 2.5-litre inline 6 M30 with an output of 145 horsepower, was installed in the engine compartment of the 5th series. This combination of the number of cylinders and working volume later became a kind of golden section for this model, and at those times almost 1,500 horses under the hood were a serious bid for success. By the way, BMW 525e12 could be visually distinguished just by the hood, on which there was a wide notch, while on the 2-litre versions it was almost flat. It was possible to recognize that under the hood of the pre-styled E12 not 4 cylinders, but 6, by a wide protrusion, the first photo. Note that at that time the modification nameplate was placed on the grille as well. In the summer of 1974, a new 4 M10 with a volume of 1.8 litres appeared in the engine lineup, from which 90 horses were removed in Munich in the version with a Solex carburetor. This defortified version was the company's response to consumer demands, or rather, a reaction to the energy crisis that broke out at that time. In early 1976, the most expensive and prestigious modification, 528, appeared. It was the Bavarian's response to the appearance of the main competitor, Mercedes-Benz E-Class W123. Equipped with a pair of carburetors, Zenith 2.8-litre motor M30 developed 165 horsepower. In the summer of the same year, instead of technically complex and not too reliable fuel injection system, Kugelfischer began to install a new injector mechanical injection Bosch Cagetronic. For the North American market, which was strategically important for BMW at that time, a separate modification was developed, 530i, which appeared in 1975. In this version, the M30 engine was equipped with a Bosch Cagetronic injection system, but to comply with more stringent environmental standards, the designers had to install a system of exhaust gas recirculation and thermal exhaust gas neutralizer, because of which the maximum power fell to the indicators of a conventional carbureted 530. Wasserstoffantrieb, this was the name of BMW's experiments on the subject of hydrogen cars. The complicated system could also lead to overheating of the engine with subsequent burning of valves and cracks in the cylinder head, because of which the engine required expensive repairs. One of the owners filed a lawsuit after the company refused to repair the consequences free of charge, and as a result of the lawsuit, the cylinder heads were replaced free of charge, even if the car warranty had already expired. Subsequently, changes were made to the design of the cylinder head, which had a positive effect on reliability. After the toxicity standards became even stricter, the 530i was replaced by the 528, which had a more familiar catalytic converter, an oxygen sensor in the exhaust system, which allowed the car to meet the new environmental requirements and be sold throughout the United States. In the same year, 1979, a version of 518i was created especially for the Japanese and Swiss markets, equipped with a mechanical injection system Bosch Cagetronic, and in Japan this version of E12 was delivered exclusively with automatic transmission. After a planned restyling on the 520th, began to install a new 6-cylinder carbureted engine M60, which later became the same M20, the base motor of the 5th series of the next two generations. The release of the first E-Class contributed to the renewal of the 5 in the summer of 1976. More than 4 dozen changes occurred in the design and construction. For example, the stamping on the hood width was linked with the nostrils and they were made more expressive. The aft has also changed, the taillights have increased in size and the gasoline tank filler has moved from the rear panel to the fender. Even the side mirrors have been moved to the corner of the window aperture. Another important innovation after restyling is a 5-speed manual transmission instead of 4-speed, as well as a brake pad wear indicator and a new paddle shifter. One can recognize the clean brainchild of Paul Bracq from the front by more rounded nostrils, which did not protrude beyond the radiator grille line. First photo, before the restyling, the taillights were noticeably smaller and there was a gas tank hatch near the right one. The North American market was a tidbit for any European manufacturer. BMW was not an exception, and therefore the new model was developed taking into account the interests and requests of Americans, that is, with an obvious aim at the overseas market. For this reason, the 5 received an unusually large number of options, including automatic transmission, central locking, power mirrors and windows, power steering, and the already mentioned system of maintaining clearance regardless of the load on the rear axle. For American 5s was characterized by rich equipment, a full power package, audio system, air conditioning, power sunroof, leather interior, alloy wheels and even a self-locking differential. It was easy to distinguish the American by protruding bumpers, safety requirements, as well as parking lights on the front fenders. It was after the release of the 5 that the BMW brand began to enjoy success and was considered prestigious by the oversaturated Americans, because this relatively small European car was well equipped, drove well and was even better to drive. The BMW Motorsport GmbH department at first simply offered modification of 525 and 528 models taking into account the wishes of a particular buyer, but in September 1979 at the Frankfurt Motor Show presented a modification M535i, which marked the beginning of the charged sedans of the 5th series. Of course, to consider a full-fledged M5, this car was not possible, but motorsport improvements were quite enough for this version stood apart in the range of modifications. Firstly, under the hood of the late E12 by efforts of BMW Motorsport engineers there was an inline 6 M30 with the volume of 3,453 cubic meters. Up to that moment such a motor could be found only in the engine compartment of the flagship sedan of the 7th series and two-door 6. Thanks to Bosch Elgetronic electronic fuel injection, the engine developed 218 horsepower at 5,200 rpm and impressive 304 Nm of torque at 4,000 rpm. With a 5-speed manual transmission, 535th could accelerate to 107.2 seconds and the top speed reached 222 km per hour. So fast at that time went only some Jaguar with V12, but not a compact German sedan. By the way, Mercedes, not counting the tuning versions from AMG and Brabus, about which we have recently, there were no modifications of the Eshka with such power. It was not without sporty entourage like anatomical seats Recaro or ASS and developed lip under the front bumper. The standard equipment of this car included 5-speed get-rag mechanics with changed ratios and direct 5th gear, stiffer and lower suspension with Bilstein shock absorbers and reinforced brakes. Since the leaded version of the 5 appeared at the very end of the life cycle of the E12 generation, the 535i version has found its embodiment almost without changes in the new generation, E28. Engine power and other characteristics of M535i remained almost the same, but as an alternative to the traditional mechanics offered. And 4-range automatic with different modes of operation, and a full-fledged M5 was first realized just in the generation with the index E28, not E12. Founded by brothers Herbert and Rolf Hartger, Hartger Tuning Studio offered a special package of improvements for owners of the top version of 528i, called Hartger 535i. As it is easy to guess from the index, the brothers went the same way as their colleagues from the motorsport department, having installed under the hood of the 5 motor from BMW 635 CSI and raising its power to 220 horses. The rest set of injections of vivacity from Hartger also quite corresponded to that from the factory, 5-speed mechanics, but with speed row, rear self-lock, 15-inch wheels, ventilated rear brakes and suspension on components of Bilstein Company. As a result, the 535 from Hartger was a fraction of a second faster than the literary. It accelerated to 100 km per hour. In exactly 7 seconds, an acceleration stopped at 230 km per hour. So fast at that time in Germany drove only Porsche cars or an Alpina 5. Butchlow was engaged in the whole model range and presented at the Frankfurt Motor Show in December 1978 the modified 3, 5, and 7. Alpina B7 Turbo was created on the basis of BMW 528i and thanks to turbocharger 300 horsepower was removed from the 3-liter M30 engine. And at that time, this Alpina had every reason to claim the title of the fastest 4-door sedan in the world. Of course, and here it could not do without the suspension of Bilstein Company, the name of which many owners of 12 then invariably pronounced with a gasp. Self-evident for the tuning version is a front and rear skirts, stereo system pioneer, sports seats and ventilated disc brakes all around. If M535i was, in fact, a small series product with a circulation of 1410 copies, the B7 Turbo was a piece product, 147 pieces were produced. At the end of 1981, when the E12 was replaced by the E28, Alpina introduced the B7S Turbo, whose engine developed an outrageous 330 horsepower and a top speed of 265 km per hour, which even the Porsche 911 Turbo could not reach. All 6 dozens of produced B7S were available in a single color dark blue metallic, Dunkelsaphirblue metallic. P.S. During 9 years of production in Europe, that is from 1972 to 1981, almost 700,000 fives of the first generation were produced. But this model was also produced in South Africa, where BMW assembly plant was opened in 1974. In Africa, the E12 was made up to 1984, that is in parallel with the model of the second generation with the index E28. That's why in South African 5s can be found quite a few parts from the younger sister. It is about the dashboard and components of front and rear suspensions. Thus, the E12 was not only the first, but also the most long-lasting 5, because no generation of the 5th series cars lasted more than 10 years on the assembly line. As we wrap up our exploration of the 5 fascinating facts about the BMW 5 Series E12, it's clear that this iconic model has left an indelible mark on automotive history. Celebrating its half-century anniversary, the E12 not only set the standard for luxury sedans but also showcased innovative engineering and design that continue to influence BMW's legacy. From its groundbreaking features to its cultural impact, the E12 remains a symbol of excellence and a beloved choice among enthusiasts. Thank you for joining us in this celebration of a true classic.